So again, welcome to the second of four Civic Lab, or third of four Civic Lab Housing Series workshops. So today, again, conversations with our private sector partners. We really wanted to bring our partners front and center to have a conversation with you as local planners and staff as you're preparing your potential projects going into next year. So we're really excited to have Julie Young with Urban Elements, Steve Vallejos with Prefab ADU, and Susan Brown with Unclad Bank today. So Dob's going to facilitate this conversation. Each of the speakers will have 20 to 30 minutes, so feel free to type your questions in the chat box for each of them. Be plenty of time for you to either us to facilitate that or for you to ask your questions out loud, and then we'll have a facilitated question and answer at the end of the session. So with that, I will turn it over to Dob.
All right, thank you, Adrienne. Very excited today for our three speakers. I'm just going to introduce them all right now, and then we'll jump in. So Susan Brown is going to be up first. She's Senior Vice President and the Residential Construction and Renovation Loan Production Director with Umpqua Bank. She's a seasoned financial services industry professional with 15 years executive leadership experience. Her role in construction loan production allows her to focus on two really important initiatives: ADUs and manufactured homes. And then after Susan, we'll have Steve Vallejos. He's the president of Prefab ADU, a licensed general contractor and factory home builder with extensive experience in design builds using all types of advanced building techniques. Over the last 14 years, he has been designing and building accessory dwelling units and custom homes using a combination of techniques, so manufactured homes, modular homes, panelized homes, as well as just conventional construction. And then finally, Julie Young is the president of Urban Elements and has been active in the development community for over 35 years. Julie formed Urban Elements, Inc., a design and development company in 2007. She has served as either property manager, developer, or project management for various retail, commercial, industrial, and hotel projects. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to Susan to get us started. Thank you.
Hey, Dob, thank you very much. And Adrienne, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. It's an honor to be here to talk with all these practitioners and professionals and policymakers who really help reshape where our housing marketplace is going. In my role as construction and renovation loan production director, I oversee all of the construction production lending in our 5 western states of Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, and Nevada. One of the areas of focus for me personally was really diving into the ADU space about 5 or 6, probably about 6 or 7 years ago now. I guess time really flies. This year has disappeared on all of us. So maybe this year we don't have to count either as birthdays or time gone by. So we'll see how that bears out over time. ADUs have been around for a long time. That's the area that I want to talk about today, is some of the successes that we're having and some of the challenges associated with trying to find ways to finance these properties, with a little bit of emphasis towards the end of my comments about trying to make this product available for lower and moderate income homeowners as well. So just as a brief introduction to the way these loans can work, there's really come to be a variety of products available. And by the way, I did not prepare any slides. This is really more of a conversation. If anyone is looking for any particular documented information, I'm certainly happy to provide whatever would be helpful afterwards. But I'll just kind of give an overview and then be able to help answer questions. So the types of products that people have traditionally been using range anywhere from the bank of mom and dad, which not all of us have access to a resource like that, all the way to a formalized construction loan product that incorporates the budget, the plans, and the specifications for that product. There's a variety of lenders who are involved in providing refinance type loans that a lot of customers will take out a cash out refinance and then endeavor to build that ADU on their own. That particular method is useful and helpful for a segment of the group wanting to do this. But one of the challenges associated with a cash out refinance is that most oftentimes, and I think Julie and Steve will probably be able to echo my comments or smile when I say, it's common to run out of money partway through the project when you don't have it fully vetted and planned and have a disciplined way to spend your money. So if someone has a great deal of equity in the property, they're able to get a line of credit that exceeds what would possibly be spent on the project. That is absolutely an option, and lots of people are doing that. We just cry a little bit when they come to us after their project is started and look for additional money. And there are not lenders, not very many lenders that I know of who are able to offer money for a project after the project has started. So that's where that breakdown typically would happen. The product that we most typically use is a construction to perm product, construction loan to permanent financing as an all-in-one product. So it's just one loan. The customer gets their construction financing, and when the project is complete, that rolls over to permanent financing. And for other lenders, we're certainly not the only ones who offer a construction to perm product. We do have some differences in the way that we administer our work, but I'm going to try to keep these comments pretty high level so that they're pertinent really across the financing spectrum. Those construction to permanent products take into account the budget, the specifications, the plans, all of the details surrounding that project, so that the company providing the financing is certain that they're going to have a full coverage of that project, that we're not going to run out of money before it's over. The other really good benefit of using that type of a product is that we use what's called an as complete value, meaning that we're going to submit those plans and specifications to the appraiser, who's going to look at that project as if it were already complete when they establish the value. I'm going to give some comments a little bit later on about appraisals and some of the challenges that we're finding in that space. So I'll address those in just a couple of minutes. But as the construction takes place, money is dispersed to the builders over the course of that project so that they get paid as the work is done. And when the entire project is done, the appraiser goes out to make sure that the project was completed the way that everybody anticipated that it was. In those type of projects, we have better success because we know that there's been enough money set aside from the beginning. Builders and customers are accountable to staying within that budget, and everything gets wrapped up. The customer ends up with a great project, bank ends up with a great loan, builder ends up with a project that's come to fruition. So that has generally worked out very nice for all of us. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the appraisal process, which is improving, but we're still seeing some really big challenges in the appraisal space when it comes to determining what these projects' value will be upon completion. So there's a couple of ways that you can do appraisals. One is called an income approach, there's a cost approach, and there's a sales comparison approach. And in the conforming lending space, which is where most of the loans are going to be made for ADU construction, we tend to use the sales comparison approach. And what that means is the appraiser is going to be looking for other like properties that also have an ADU that have sold within the last 6 months within about 2 miles of the subject property. And if you're thinking about the progression of ADUs in your region, there aren't a lot of them yet. When you look at the square footage, there aren't a lot of these projects within 2 square miles of each other. And once people have them, they're tending not to sell them. So we don't have a good opportunity to know what their sales value is. So when the appraiser is trying to determine from a sales comparison approach, they don't really have a substantial selection of comparable properties to utilize in making their analysis. And so a really good appraiser is going to be able to make those extrapolations to come up with the contributory value for that ADU. But most appraisers yet don't have that experience that would give them the tools they need to extrapolate and come up with those values of the ADUs. So one of the common challenges we're coming up against in financing these projects, we've got a builder, plans and specs, we've got the whole thing, but the appraisals are coming in what we call light. So the customer is either having to choose to bring in more money to the transaction, or worst case scenario, they're canceling the transaction altogether because they don't have the financial means to make it work. So that's a challenge. Like I said, we're beginning to see some improvement in that space, but it's just going to take more volume of these projects in order for that to become more consistent, I guess I would say. One of the areas that I want to talk about is the permitting process and what we've seen in many of our areas. At Umpqua in particular, I can't speak to other lenders, but we've really broadened our look at what is an ADU. There used to be some very archaic definitions of what those products are. We kind of made up our own rules that they had to be a certain size compared to the main house and couldn't be more than a certain number of feet away. But we recognize that jurisdictions are really getting a great handle on what they deem acceptable for their communities. And so in most instances, if a jurisdiction has permitted that project as an ADU, we're going to be able to provide financing should all of the other mechanisms or characteristics of that loan bear out. We, like most lenders, are able to do internal conversions, external ADUs, as well as detached ADUs. They come in all shapes and sizes and forms now, from very simple, modest manufactured home. We've got a program where we can even use a manufactured home as the ADU, all the way up to a specific site-built, engineered and architect designed or designer project. So all across the gambit, all of those type of projects are being able to be accommodated these days, which is really nice. A couple of the other areas that I wanted to address, particularly as we think about ADUs for low and moderate income customers. These projects traditionally have really relied on customers who, they have been available to customers who have sufficient income to qualify for a new larger loan without the benefit of rental income. And they also tend to have a significant amount of equity in their property so that when we do that appraisal, they don't have to bring additional cash to the table. When we get into other groups of people who either are restricted on their income, for whatever reason, they wouldn't be able to afford additional payments without that rental income, the challenge that we run into there is a little pesky regulation that was put into play in about 2010 now. It's been quite some time. It's called Ability to Repay, which allows lenders to have what's referred to as a qualified mortgage. And in all of that regulation, which is a very long, I think it's 1,200 pages or something, so definitely not something you'd want to read in an evening. But it basically describes the ways that we can calculate income and the type of income that we can use. And those income sources are restricted to income that has been demonstrated over time and will continue into the future. And so when we're looking at adding a brand new ADU and counting income that's never been received before, those two things fall outside of those guidelines that are prescribed in the ATR QM rules. There is a little sliver of possibility for a particular product that Fannie Mae offers with their Home Ready feature that allows for lending to customers who are at or below the area median income. And there are some special considerations for rental income in those particular cases. So it's possible that there may be a sliver of a product available for a sliver of consumers in that space. And we're excited to explore and learn a little bit more about that. I also wanted to talk about another really interesting space that is admittedly new to me, and I'm still a little bit of a skeptic, but this is coming up in conversation a lot about making these projects that start out as an ADU. So you've got your primary dwelling and then you've got the accessory unit. There are some people who are turning their properties into condominiums and then selling off the ADU, which is a new concept. And at first blush, doesn't seem like there's a way for that to take off very easily. What it entails is somebody who has the money to build out that project. So let's say a construction to permanent loan could build it out. Then they need to get permission from their lender to turn that project into a condominium that was a fee simple project. And then they have to get permission to be able to plat it that way and then sell off part of the collateral for their existing loan. So there's a lot of hurdles associated with that, but we are seeing some anecdotal instances of that occurring. I know of 5 of those projects up in the Seattle market that have successfully been sold on the open market now. So once an idea begins to get steam, secondary markets at some point will peak up, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to decide if that's a type of product that they would want to offer going into the future. So I've got a little, I'm watching on the sideline for that to see if that gains very much steam and if that's something that needs to be explored as a secondary product at some point going into the future. One other place that I'll address is some of the pilot projects that have been touched on in various parts of the country, specifically geared to low and moderate income homeowners who are, these pilot projects are providing some interim construction financing. They're providing some rental training, how to be a landlord, and then they're utilizing some credit enhancements for the customer, the homeowner, that in the event that the rent didn't get paid on that accessory unit, there would be an organization that could step in to cover the mortgage payment or cover the rent or other different solutions to begin to build that homeowner's experience in having this new addition to their property. We're looking at a couple of projects with a few nonprofits, both in the Portland area and down in the Los Angeles area, about potential participation in projects like that, so that we can help some of those low and moderate income and frankly underserved markets have an opportunity to realize wealth building and increased income from these type of projects. So I think in general that that kind of wraps up the remarks I have on financing the ADU piece. And of course, I'm happy to entertain questions either now or at the end in our general session, whichever is most appropriate.
All right, thank you so much, Susan. I think, you know, as planners, we don't spend as much time on the lending side of things, but it's obviously, you know, such a critical part of the equation for actually realizing the outcomes that planners are hoping for. So if folks, I don't see any questions yet, but if folks do have questions, please put them into the chat and we can do them now, or if you want to wait, we can do them at the very end. Maybe I'll just ask a quick question up front. You sort of touched on this in your closing statements, but I'm curious if you can speak more to whether Umpqua or any of your peers have worked with any public sector partners before, you know, be it specific loan products or even just like ADU finance education for potential, you know, homeowner developers. And I guess would that be helpful in your eyes?
That's a great question, Dov. So we have had the opportunity at Umpqua to be involved in a lot of education pieces of this. Some people may be familiar with what's called the ADU Academy, run by Cole Peterson out of Portland, Oregon. We've had the opportunity to be involved in many of his training sessions, helping homeowners understand all of the pieces about ADUs. We haven't yet been involved in a financing project. That's a piece that we're working on right now with a couple of nonprofits. There's no MOUs yet or any formal arrangements yet. Right now, what we're doing is studying actual projects that are happening and how our product may need to change in order to be able to accommodate the limitations that some of those homeowners may have. We're very fortunate in that we have access to portfolio money, which would allow us to be creative either in some test programs or building out a larger product once we can figure out if it's financially viable. It is absolutely in our interest to stay involved in the conversation and explore potential ways that we can be involved. We're in lots and lots of conversations, and it's really a matter of finding the right kind of project in an area that we serve that we would be able to contribute to that kind of effort.
Great. So a couple of questions have come in, so I'll sort of facilitate those. A question about junior ADUs. I'm not sure if that's it might be a California specific definition, but you're obviously familiar with what those are. I'm wondering if those are looked at differently in the eyes of the lender.
That's a really great question, and I'm glad they brought that up. Seattle also has what they call DADUs, the detached ADUs and the junior ADUs. Regardless of the structure of the ADU, essentially we're looking for something that's got a full kitchen facility, full bathroom facility, a sleeping area, and a living area. And that can be all one big space. It can be cut up into rooms, whatever the case. We don't differentiate personally between the junior ADUs and the ADUs as long as they have those characteristics. However, there is accommodation now in many, many jurisdictions, including Portland, Seattle, and I know jurisdictions in California, where the jurisdiction will allow for a junior ADU as well as the full ADU. The problem that we have right now with that makeup is that none of the loan products that are available on the market today on a wholesale level, there could be individual lenders who have specialty programs, but there isn't any money available yet to finance projects that have more than one ADU. So we've kind of got a crash right now happening with ideas moving a little bit faster than the secondary market is moving to make those funds available. But as there's more evidence of that, more history of how those loans perform, that's another area that the secondary markets will surely be considering. Great.
And then a couple questions about your reference to the subdivisions. I think it's an interesting idea. Maybe Steve can actually talk more a little bit about this, but I know that there's some specific issues in California with the streamlining created by state legislation in California that kind of makes it difficult or might even prohibit that subdivision and sale idea. Do you know if that's true in California? And then just regardless, if you could go into more detail about just how that works in Seattle, that'd be interesting.
Right. There will be people on your panel, Dov, who are much more literate on the specific rules about the subdivisions for California. So I want to defer any kind of answer to them. What I know about the projects in Seattle is that I've now seen, somebody sent me a listing with 5 sold ADUs that were all condominiumized projects. And so if anybody is interested specifically in those, I am very, very happy to share those links. Possibly when someone else is speaking, I can put them in the chat box so that people can just log on to those themselves to see what those projects were And they ended up selling for what seems like an incredible amount of money, except when you figure out what the cost of housing is in the Seattle market, it's reasonable, I guess you would say. I haven't been involved in any of those projects specifically. What I know now is that we have evidence that there are at least 5 of these projects that have been completed and then sold, and they're now 2-unit condominiums, which is a really interesting concept, especially when you understand a little bit about condominiums. It's very, very different than the simple ownership.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating topic. And I know at least in the city of Sacramento, there's been a lot of that happening in Midtown, not being permitted as ADUs, but just subdividing like a Midtown lot and then building like an alley loaded unit just under the existing code, not as an ADU. So it is an interesting idea.
Interesting.
Another question, not about ADUs, but interested in your thoughts. Barriers to sort of multiplexes, so 2 to 4 attached units getting financed. Is that something that your shop works with? And the question is asking anecdotally, they've heard that financing can be difficult for small town developers to navigate that process.
I'm going to echo whoever is expressing that concern. In the majority of programs that allow for construction financing, they are generally limited to single family, owner occupied, not exclusively, but generally speaking. The irony is that once that project is complete, duplex, triplex, fourplex, there's lots of money available to purchase those existing units, refinance those existing units, but there isn't a big appetite for building small projects that are basically spec financing. Not necessarily, but generally speaking, those are being done on a spec basis. And I think that there is still this residual fear from the 2005, 6, 7 era when there was so much leftover inventory that has prevented lenders from really jumping right back into that pool. There are beginning to be pockets of money available for that. I'm sad to say we currently don't have that, but there are a smattering of lenders who do offer lending. And again, if somebody wants to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to give some ideas about where I think they might be able to look for financing like that.
Awesome. Yeah. So on this particular question, I'll ask Julie later if she can speak to it. And then Steve, if you can cover the question just about whether you're allowed to, under California state law, do the subdivision. It seems like not, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are. And then, yeah, that just last comment, Susan, if you're able to share a summary of some of the loan products that you mentioned today, if you have just kind of like an infographic or flyer or takeaways, something like that, we can share that with the group, and that would be really great. But
great. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think if we don't have any other questions, we'll move on to our next presenter, which is Steve. And then Susan, if you can stick around, we'll have some more questions later for the group. All right, Steve, go ahead.
Great. Let me answer that question before it travels too far from my mind. In California, unless the property is zoned such that it can meet the local ordinance criteria for subdivision, meaning that the property is big enough to subdivide into 2 parcels that meets the zoning minimums, it's not an option to consider. And if you're exploring doing an ADU in that configuration with the possibility of splitting it, then it's important to actually do all the utilities as separate utility connections and not feed the ADU off of the primary home's services, so that when the split does happen, it can be done legally without having to redo all those connections. So I'll also note that because we're in such a housing crisis in this state, there is or was, I'll have to double check the status on it, legislation that was being looked at to consider the ability to split single-family home parcels and into multiple parcels so that the ADU itself could be independently owned. I do recall that being parts of discussions back in July, August timeframe, and a piece of legislation was being worked on, but I can't remember the number on it and what its status was.
Steve, that was, I can answer that. That's SB 1120, and it did end up failing.
Okay.
It may come back around, so we'll see on that one.
Yeah, generally the rule of thumb is on those types of things, they the first go around is an absolute no, and then over time these things get kind of whittled down and negotiated into reasonable ground. So it's just it's a process, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that finds its way back into the market with some revisions to kind of help meet all sides. I wanted to add one more thing here too, because financing is such a big topic overall in the ADU space. And one of the things I like to remind everybody when we get into the dialogue about financing is an understanding of where we are in the market overall in terms of volume. And here in California, we are a 9 million plus home market in terms of the single family homes here within the United States, or within the state of California. The last surveys done by Bay Area Council, I think, and UC Berkeley's Turner Center put us somewhere around 30,000 permits roughly in the last 2 years. So if we add on an extra 10,000 units that have happened since the 2004 legislation was passed allowing ADUs, you find that we're 0.004% market saturation. So I mean we're still a long ways from even hitting the 1% mark on this. So when Susan was talking about the abilities and the struggles with bringing up comp pricing for market values for financing and things, that's where the challenge is that we're still at the very, very infancy of this market, and as more and more ADUs get built and properties change hands, then we can see a better reading on what the true measure of value is. But for now, it still remains somewhat of a challenge for the financing and the appraisal community. So I'm going to jump into a slideshow presentation about scaling ADUs, and I'm going to cover a lot of material rather quickly. So it's going to be a bit of a slur, and I'll just ask that you bear with me, and it'll hopefully all come together in a way that is easy for everyone to understand when we wrap this up. But let's can everybody see the screen here? Are we okay with this?
Looks good.
Okay, good. So again, my name is Steve Leos. I'm president of Prefab ADU. We are a panelized manufacturer for ADUs here in California. As Dov said in the beginning, I've been in the construction industry for over 30 years. I've been building ADUs for actually 15 years now. Built over 300 of them, and we're actively, designing and building them all over the Bay Area, and actually now moving into Southern California with the goal of working with municipalities and communities on really focusing on scaling ADUs. So it's great to have the opportunity to speak to the Sacramento market about different things that help move this along, so that we can realize the potential of ADUs to help what my goal is to first have an impact on cutting down the growth in the homeless community, and then with that, really essentially providing a lot more affordable housing to people. So when we look at the ADU process, it can be simplified down to 3 components. I left finance off of this because I knew Susan was going to cover the discussion about finance, and certainly that's a component that could be on here. but rather than me get redundant on something that somebody more educated than me spoke about, I just kind of wanted to keep it to what the consumer sees as the 3 steps in the process, as well as the municipalities as well. And each of these areas has room for improvement. So when we look at these 3 areas, the design is an area where you're working with architects or even as-built contractors. And the things that they can do to try and look at scaling are standardize on plans and features. This means, at some point you move away from doing anything and everything for everybody to really finding what your lane is and what you're good at, and really focus on, really driving your solution set in that lane and staying there. That means limit your scope, knowing your market, who you serve best. When we talk about ADUs and I mentioned the word lanes, there are definitely different lanes. There's the people who are just down and dirty looking for the cheapest thing out there. There are people who are looking for, things that are kind of standardized and kind of fit a general feel of what they're looking for. They're cost conscious, but they're they want some freedoms there as well. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's challenging sites, affluent homeowners who want a lot more creativity and flexibility in what they're doing. Really got to know your lane and stay in it. The last thing they need to do is map out a process of what they're doing with a real understanding of where they're doing things well and where they're facing challenges, and try and figure out how to address those challenges or stay out of those lanes. When it comes to the next step, this is really the dialogue to dig into with this group, is what can we do about the permitting process to make things scalable? And one of the things that comes up all over the state and really now all over the nation is the idea of pre-approved plans. The idea of something that can be readily available to the consumer and runs through an expedited process with the municipality. The other option to consider in those areas that is not a pre-approved plan, but actually kind of falls into that gray area, is state-approved plans. Things where HCD was involved in putting a stamp on it, whether it be a panelized product, a modular product, or a manufactured product, where the local jurisdiction is serving in a lesser role in terms of the plan approval and the inspection process. And then the last one here, this one's a subject that is a sore subject with the consumer, but oftentimes not really understood too clearly by the municipalities, is finding ways to do checklists. And this goes beyond the application checklist. This is the application checklist is really telling the consumer, what do you need to bring to the table for us to take a plan in? This is really about unifying the design and review process. And the best way I can describe this is that, we do a lot of ADUs in a lot of jurisdictions, and what we found is submitting the same plan over and over to a local jurisdiction, we find that each planner has a different method of reviewing that and views the local code sometimes a little differently. So much so that we may have had a product approved 2 or 3 times, and then we get a new plan checker looking at it, and they have a different view on what should be considered things to approve. And we find that we're doing another round of edits to this. So this is really about getting that staff to have a common agreement and understanding a little bit beyond their interpretation of the code, but making sure that they all kind of see those things equally. And then on the build side, standardizing plans and process, standardizing finishes, all of these things help speed up and control costs. Factory builds are a tremendous way to incorporate methods that increase productivity, and then constantly look at testing new technology. I put a highlight in the bottom that the goal here is to increase the affordable ADUs while decreasing the workload on the staff, and whether that's the design, the permit, or the build team, it's all of those things are areas where improvements can be had. I want to talk about pre-approved plans real quick here, because it seems to be one of the #1 topics statewide for municipalities to consider. And there's some good and bad that can go with this. And the good happens when there's a really strong understanding of what you're driving for and how to get to that outcome. The bad is when there's a lack of education and understanding about what makes the right kind of products. And I put this up here to just kind of cover the fact that we're seeing some strange things happen where municipalities go out and hire a consultant to do consumer outreach. You get a big laundry list of all the things that the consumer desires, but without properly measuring the direct correlation to the local codes, property profiles, income, we get a confusion about outreach being true analytics. And so what happens with that is if you go down that route, and then the next route is you go to an RFP process to hire architects to do designs based on this criteria, we often wander into a space where you get a little bit more of a product that's designed for recognition in publications and less about meeting the demand for affordable housing. And the end result is you get a lot of wasted time and wasted money and a failure to connect with the consumer. So I just wanted to cover that briefly. There's not enough time for me to dig really deep into the methodology to improve that. I'd certainly be happy to take that up in any questions or separate discussions, but I could do a 1 to 2 hour session just covering how to go about this in a different way. But to give you an idea about just kind of how to do this the right way, I did this quick little study on the Sacramento area here just to help kind of understand what is the difference between outreach and analytics. And analytics is a process where we dig into what size properties we have. So if you look at this search up here, I break it down into categories of the size of the properties. And then we pull a parcel count of properties that have 1 unit on there, no more than 1 unit. And so here you can see, in Sacramento, these are the quantities across the area. But I highlighted here in red, 44% of the market potential is in these properties that have a 5,000 to 7,000 square foot lot. So this is analytics. This is telling us exactly where is the sweet spot for opportunity to do a lot of ADUs. It doesn't mean that we can't do them all the way down here in the 5 percentile area, but it means that if we're really looking to scale, the numbers are much more attractive in the 5 to 7,000, the 7,000 to 10,000. And then they start to get smaller as we go lower and we go higher. And I popped up a few other quadrant areas here. So I did the same thing for Rio Linda, Folsom, and Elk Grove. And you can see each of them, kind of hover in this area here where that's the most volume. So with that, if you're trying to come up with an idea of pre-approved plans, you explore what products fit into those lots. Obviously, on a 5 to 7,000 square foot lot, you wouldn't be designing an ADU standard of 1,000 square feet because that might challenge the ability to fit into the zoning requirements. So what we do down here is then we go into a little bit of a market analysis where we look at our products, what we have available in the size range of 150 square feet to 1,000 square feet. We look at the kit price, the full build price. We study market rate rents. So we find out what is the comparable rent of existing products out in that market for the size. So for instance, this Jake product is 390 square feet. We charge $153,000 complete for the build. Right now, market rate rents for that are about $1,395. But if this product was built and financed into the first mortgage, it would have about a $584 monthly mortgage add. So that's about an $811 difference. That difference can be measured 2 different ways by the different consumers. One consumer may be somebody looking for income, and that shows there's a gap between what I'm paying to what the market rate is for me to be creative about the income opportunity. For somebody doing this for a family member, this is basically saying that's an $811 savings per month if we go this route. And then for all of you city officials, what we're looking for is to target this being the outlay for the consumer allowing you to dig into this area for housing for the tenancy and getting into that low AMI clientele. And the excitement is that a lot of our products really end up in this 40% or lower. I did want to make one mention here is that one of the things we found out by doing this study is that there are no products in this size range. So what we found is that we were forced to use the 390 square foot one bedroom product for everything that we dropped down from there. So you don't have a competitive product to this 66,000 square foot studio ADU. So that person who just needs that type of housing is forced to go up into this size and this price range right now without an option to go down into these categories. So this just gives us an idea of how we look at things. And when we talk to municipalities, then we kind of highlight what would be the sweet spot products to consider for doing a pre-approved plan based on just a quick study. This is a quick overview. It's not like it's not a super in-depth one. But what I mentioned over here, this product would work everywhere across the entire plane of properties. These products here that I highlighted work really good in the sweet spots, and they also happen to be our #1 sellers for those very same reasons. When we're looking at pre-approved plans, we get into the discussion of what is what. So these are those 3 plans that I mentioned: the Elizabeth, the Jake, and the David. The Elizabeth is a 1-bedroom, 300 square foot unit. The Jake is a 390 square foot 1-bedroom unit, and the David is a 640 square foot 2-bedroom unit. When we talk about the different methodologies to build, we look at, when I showed you that first slide of where we can get into efficiency and scaling, this gets into the comparison chart of the evolution of that. When you're doing a conventional process where you hire an architect or an engineer, a designer, or the homeowner does a submittal, and then a local contractor does the build, $20,000 for the design, about 3 months to do the process, about plus or minus 4 months. Right now, under state law, actually now this has been reduced to 60 days. As of today, I have not seen a single municipality review and approve an ADU in 60 days. COVID has had a huge impact on things this year. So I venture to say next year we'll see some big improvements on that. But right now the municipalities are supposed to only take 60 days to review these things. But we still got a ways to go on getting there for a lot of the places in the state. The build price of a customized product like this in the Bay Area starts off at around $400 a square foot. Realistically, we're seeing $600 to $1,000 in some parts of the Bay Area. But keeping this rate here on the lower end of what we're seeing, a 13-month process, about $276,000 to build a 640 square foot David plan. That was this plan here. Our standard process right now, we have a $9,800 fee to do the design, 30-day process to get the package out. Typically, we're seeing that these things are products that we've done high repeat on. So we've across multiple jurisdictions. So we know kind of what it takes to get a product approved. It's not just putting a plan together, it's putting a plan together with experience of what the municipalities are looking for. So that comes down in time. The cost comes down. This is where we average right now in the Bay Area, and we take 90 days to build them. So right off the bat, this comparison is a 46% savings in time and about a 17% savings in cost. When you look at the pre-approved process, this is where we pick up some speed and economics for the consumer and for the municipalities as well. You're going to get a reduced cost on the design because basically it's a pre-approved package. So you're really just doing site plan preparation and any comments and different things that go around with that. So it's a huge cut in cost and time to prep the package. Usually pre-approved plans are done same day or within a week in terms of the review process. If we kept the build price the same, assuming that these are still being done independently on a one-off basis, the price would still remain the same. If we were doing them at a scaling relationship with the city, chances are you could save 10% or more off of this number if we saw the scaling of that product go up in that city. But generally, we can cut a couple of weeks off. So overall here, we're seeing, you know, a little bit more savings in time, and then a little bit more savings in money. And this is the general idea about how we really get into scaling ADUs in municipalities. If we don't go into this second and third tier strategy, what you're left with is the homeowners left with each and every one of them is doing an experiment on their own, and taking on the challenge of designing and building something. And oftentimes that means, kind of like what Susan Brown mentioned earlier, is they don't always know the numbers up front. So it's something where you really don't even get into the build, and sometimes all the way through the build, before you know what the actual cost to build is. Where you do things in a production-based strategy, a lot of that goes away, because it's about standardized plans, standardized features, and that makes pricing more standardized across the board as well. And that's where we get into benefits with consumers, and that's why, you know, to date we're kind of the #1 ADU builder in the state, and from what I hear, in the nation, because we're all about process and scaling strategies, where a lot of the entities have really just signed up in the last couple of years, and they're just exploring who they are in the marketplace and trying to understand what the consumer needs. So it's a lot of information covered in a short amount of time, so I just figured I'd try and get through this quickly. I'd be happy to answer any questions that come up.
Great, thank you, Steve. So we did have one question. So you were talking a lot about pre-approved plans, which is great, because I know a lot of our jurisdictions are thinking about that. How much leeway is provided for minor modifications on those pre-approved plans? And the comment says it seems like there could be a high likelihood that many folks would want at least some minor change, and asking if you have any examples of those in Northern California.
So we're doing this now. We're working with San Jose on actually a series of products, and we've been watching and monitoring this actually all over the state. There's always a desire for opportunity to make adjustments. I think the key here is to try and focus the consumer on what benefits them. The pre-approved plans themselves have a minor amount of adjustments that can be done, and this will come down to the relationship with the plan generator and the local jurisdiction. There are things like maybe possibly moving the door or window, so long as it doesn't change the structural and brace wall strategies. Stuff like that is where we get into the kind of the questionable topics of not really having a lot of bandwidth in terms of flexibility. A lot of it really comes down to giving them flexibility on finish selections, and that's in general, that's where most consumers feel they get the benefit. When they ask, well, I really want to change this, or I really want to change that, once you educate them that we can go down that road, we're going to immediately jump off of the pre-approved plan. We're going to move you over to an uptick in cost for the design, and we're going to go through a little bit slower process on the review and approval, and ultimately it's going to add cost. When given the opportunity to explore those things, most of them will consider the idea of just backing off of those change requests, or considering going to, you know, maybe the next plan size up that has maybe a little bit more of those features that they're looking for. So a lot of this is that there's no picture that we can paint that is considered perfect for everyone. But when we're trying to look at this particular lane that we want to service, it's about speed and economics, and that drives a lot of the final decision-making process. And so it makes it a little easier for them to stay in that lane.
Got it. And a question from Susan, just along those same lines, do those comments apply to exterior changes? So the prefab product will have, quote, neighborhood appeal? Yeah.
It's a question of how, first, on the design side, the entity, what they want to do with exterior facade options. So for instance, we could design a product where the facade is traditional with a gable roof, but they may want that same product to look more modern, so we do a shed style roof on it. It's a question of, do we work that out with the city and actually present that pre-approved plan with an array of facade options, or is the city willing to accept it as a standardized plan with a slight deviation change to that facade as what they would consider still allowing it to be a pre-approved plan with the facade change. Outside of that, the finish side of it is absolutely across the board without getting into any strangeties there. We could go from, you know, from a horizontal to vertical siding to stucco. We can go from a comp roof to a tile roof. Most of these things the municipalities will look at and consider what they would allow as an acceptable deviation on the pre-approved plan without having to do a full resubmittal. But again, this is a relationship development strategy, and the idea that we promote within municipalities is talking with organizations like us about the setup of a structure. So more than like the bonding of a relationship, we're not, in other words, we're not here to say, work with us and we'll solve all your problems and and then nobody else has an opportunity. It's about setting up a strategy so that the local can at that point say, okay, we've got this down now. So if other entities want to come in and submit pre-approved plans, we now have the structure that allows us to have an array of pre-approved plans that meet our consumers' needs without us having to go out to an RFP, pay somebody, be obligated to an entity, and move those organizations in and out as the traction of their products ebb and flow.
Just a back to basics question that you might be uniquely equipped to answer, given your experience across the board for ways to build ADUs. Can you just explain the cost and approval differences between the modular and prefab products versus the more conventional stick-built products? What are the advantages of those?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's a question that that always requires an explanation beyond bids. What we find over the 15 years of doing this is that we can range all over the place in terms of how we compare to a conventional build quote. We can be extremely less. We can be on par, and we've even seen where we've had scenarios where we were more expensive than what they're being quoted. But when we pull out the true measuring stick is post construction, we find that inevitably the common theme is that it is a cost savings. For two reasons. One, there's always a time savings, and time is always money when you're looking at how you're applying money, and how like in today's market, things material prices and everything can change month to month, and so that could have a huge impact on things. The bigger piece to the puzzle is that prefab solutions have a tendency to require all the decision making happening up front. You can't put a product down a factory line with the assumption that we're gonna make these finished decisions while the product is on a production line. That can't happen. So what it means is that there's a much more detail-oriented process to define the whole product on the front end, put the numbers to it, and be accurate so that you can hit the ground running and actually do that speed of construction. What we find with conventional products is that by the time the customer gets to the point of actually putting the final budget together, they're wore out. They're wore out from the design process of having to answer so many questions about things that they weren't really prepared to answer, and it created so much confusion and stress. And now you're digging into the finishes. Oftentimes, the system almost counts on the fact that they're going to be a little confused, and they're going to go to what they call budget allocations. And so lots of major components of the build end up with budget allocations. And there's always a different perspective of what that budget allocation covers when you're in the build. The contractor or the builder has the economic solutions in mind when they set that budget, and when it comes to time to pick your kitchen cabinets, you're looking at saying, okay, here's what I want, and the contractor saying, well, this is what your budget covers. And so these are the things that cause the run on, the run up. You also run into a lot more situations with inspections. If it's a one-off product, it means that there's a lot of things that went on in the design that aren't clear on a flat two-dimensional drawing that have to become clear in a three-dimensional build. And that creates a lot of opportunity for error in judgment in cost or confusion even at the municipality level as to what exactly should be done here to make this physically meet code. And that creates scenarios for change orders and different things. So we find that the prefab products contain the cost and time frame because a lot of things are answered up front. Conventional builds have a process of you got to have a contingency budget of X amount of dollars because you're more than likely going to be tapping into that plus some along the way.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Susan, I know you said that you had a comment on the financing, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to Julie. So if it's all right, I'm going to pass it over to Julie Young to speak, and then if we have time in the full facilitated questions, we can talk about financing as well. All right.
Hi, everybody. I think that am I allowed start video? Can the host share my video at this point? It says the host is not sharing my video.
Yeah, Julie, give me just a second here.
You bet. So while we're waiting for the video to load, I would just like to let everyone know that Susan is actually Umpqua Bank that we're working with on our project, the KIND project that we'll be talking about today. So I was very excited to see you'd be part of this call. Steve, I want to let you know that we have a site in Sacramento that was a 6,400 square foot lot that we have mapped for 8 single-family home units that already have the utilities distributed. The site's ready to go. We actually have permits in place for a stick-build construction. So if you'd like to drop ADUs on this site and do the first ADU subdivision in the city of Sacramento, we'd be delighted to work with you on that.
Love to help you.
Speaking of the kinds of things that can hold up an ADU on a site, just by way of example of trying to do a smaller footprint in the city of Sacramento on a 6,400 square foot lot, we have to have 3 feet of setback off the back of the building, and we had to have another 10 feet of setback off the front for the public utility distribution for water, sewer, and electric, which limited the depth of the homes to 27 feet. And because of the fire rating that would be needed between buildings, which we have programmed into our stick-build zero lot line product, you would have to be set back 3 feet, which if you stagger those ADUs to one side of the lot to get your 3 foot of clearance, would mean that the maximum square footage of the ADU would be a 14 foot by 27 foot ADU. So I think what ends up happening if you're a developer like myself, you try to program in all your limitations on the front end for utility distribution and setback, and then you sit there and say, what kind of footprint am I left with? And then when you go do a deep dive into the internet to try to find an ADU that's prefabricated that can fit within your footprint, I can tell you I've probably researched 100 different options and none of them will fit. So that kind of forces you back into a stick build scenario, which is not cost effective, as Steve mentioned, for a lot of reasons that people don't think of. And I know there's a lot of interest in ADU and smaller unit product because it makes sense. I mean, housing security is really, really important, and we need housing security in order to really support, you know, the health of our region on so many levels. So it's almost kind of a sad commentary to say that you have to start with everything you can't do before you can figure out what you can do.
Julie, when you're ready, you can share your screen.
Would you mind letting me share the screen now?
Julie.
Yes.
Could I give a quick response to your situation, which by the way echoes every consumer that we've ever dealt with across the board? There's absolutely solutions out there, and for your scenario, I just wanted to give you a quick little win option here to consider. This is our Becky plan. It's 14 by 24, and it's a little 1-bedroom unit that fits right within your range of options that you have, has a nice little front porch to it. It's one of our #1 sellers out there. So yeah, it's a great product for that scenario, but it requires, like everything else in these scenarios, it requires time, experience, to review all these different scenarios that come up in these challenging scenarios of properties. And that product was birthed in Berkeley, where we do a ton of ADUs on properties where the property is only 3,000 square foot with a single family home on there, an old Victorian or something like that. So we have very limited real estate to even start with to consider an ADU. So yeah, there's solutions out there for you, for sure.
Wonderful. Is everybody able to see my screen now?
Not yet, Julie. There should be a green share screen button at the bottom.
Yeah, I clicked that. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience as I get this screen loaded. The one thing, just to kind of reiterate and close up this ADU conversation we were having, one of the things I've done is I chaired the Alley Activation Alliance for the city of, not for the city of Sacramento, but because a group of us in a public-private partnership wanted to activate alleys to bring them to their highest and best use. And our reason for doing so is because Sacramento, like many of the areas in our region, has capacity on the alley side to create access for ADU dwellings. And I was working with Jeremy Drucker. He had a project called the Stitch Housing Project, where he was putting 3 units at the back of the typical 160 by 40 Sacramento lot. And in doing so, we named the alleys. We got Liestel Alley built. We got, Old Soul. There's all this abundant goodness that comes from alley activation. And one of the things we studied was how many ADU opportunities existed within the central city of Sacramento in the grid of the city. And there were actually 3,600 housing opportunities that were untapped, that were alley facing for ADUs in our central city. And if you multiply that by 2 or 3, you can see that we could probably hit that 11,000 unit housing need for at least 1 year just within our central city using existing resources. So the capacity is certainly there. The land is there. You have this capacity to empower multiple developers instead of just waiting for the big guys to get units built that are only for rent, not for sale. So if you really want to make a meaningful difference for housing and housing security in your various jurisdictions, eliminate the restrictions. It's crazy for every single homeowner trying to go in and get something built to have to figure out their off-sites and their on-sites and all of their utility connection and everything that they need to do. And as like Steve mentioned earlier, splitting your utilities so at some point in the future you might be able to accomplish a lot split. I think that we've made it so complicated that we've basically shot ourselves in the foot in a way as it relates to housing security and the capacity to live with smaller footprint. And for all of us here on this call, we live in this region, and I think we know how desperately housing is needed, and that we want solutions that are more simple and create, I think, a little bit of ease on the pocketbook, especially for people that are paying enormous rental rates. I'm sorry, I'll get off my platform relative to ADU activation and move over to the KIND project. What you're looking at here is the site plan for the KIND project. This project is in West Sacramento. It's on the corner of 4th Street and F. 620 4th Street is the address. It is 148 studio units, and this is the site plan. There are only 39 parking places. The amenities on the site include picnic tables and barbecues and outdoor table tennis and a dog park and a outdoor fitness station and yoga and meditation decks and bicycle parking and EV charging for cars and EV charging for bikes. This is a solar-ready product that is all electric, so it hits our climate change goals. It is a CLT build, a cross-laminated timber, so it's green building materials. It's basically just a beautiful little product. The interesting thing and the motivation for this product was I was just so tired of building things that started out with an objective of being reasonable rentals or home purchases. And through just the pain and suffering of getting projects built, always having cost creep on projects, eating up, contingency early on, and being there at the end of a project, making compromises, as Steve kind of alluded to, on finishes to try to get things out the door, as budget gets eaten up with things that are frankly meaningless to the occupant of a project. So my objective was basically, how do I build something beautiful and cost effectively where I can rent out a unit for $11.50 a month? And Steve, I think on the matrix that you had set up, you were looking at like $13.95 for rental for your units, possibly as a baseline. This is a product that leases for $11.50 a month for 122 of the units and $12.50 a month for 26 of the units. There are 26 ADA units on the ground floor, and the remaining units on the ground floor are ADA adaptable. We'll get into some of the images of the project here. You can see that it is a very slim profile, and that is due to the CLT construction between floors and also on the roof deck. Very heavily landscaped and screened project. The city of West Sacramento has been frankly wonderful to deal with on this project. I'll get into some of the difficulties of the project, but before I do so, let me show you kind of what the interior of these units look like. These have 12-foot ceilings. You can see the cross-laminated timber finish on the ceiling.
Julie, you're still on the same image. If you're jumping around on your computer and to different images, it's going to force you to keep doing a screen share again.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Julie, you can exit your screen share and then re-screen share some of the images. If you share your desktop and not just the document, it'll allow you to move around the images.
Thank you for my education on screen share.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, well now let's just look at this other image of the project, and you can see what I'm talking about with regard to the slim profile of the CLT between floors and at the rooftop. You can see the impact of the 12-foot ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling glass. Every unit has a balcony or immediate adjacency to outdoor space. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I know we're running out of time here, and I really want to save room for questions if there are some. Let me show you what the interior of the unit looks like so you can kind of get a sense of this. you can see they're very modern. They've got a mezzanine deck in every unit where we made sure it was sized so a queen size mattress could fit up there in the event you want your sleeping space separate from your sleeping space. I kind of want to go back here to the street image. I want to show you this so you can just kind of see how heavily landscaped and lush the project is, and the adjacency to the public sidewalk, and some of the things that we've resolved. We really like this overhang of the second and third floor balconies to the ground floor. We think that creates some interest with the project. And then coming back to this little guy here in the center courtyard, this just gives you, I think, a good sense of how warm and inviting the neighborhood is. So in addition, the interior amenities include a coffee and meeting room. If you wanted to do on-site training or meetings, an on-site management office, parcel lockers, mail lockers, laundry rooms. There's a spin room for exercise bikes. We really tried to pack as many amenities and services into the project, also including vegetable garden and herb gardens. We wanted this to be a very COVID-resistant place that where people felt a pride of place, where you felt like you could be proud of your home, you could have your friends over, you could feel like you live somewhere cool, and that you could actually afford to live here and put your groceries on the table too. We are trying this product. I don't know of another product where the developer is basically holding rental rates 25% below market, but we're doing it because we're irritated. We're irritated, I guess, in a good way that, housing is so stinking expensive, and we've got a lot of people that need to be sheltered. And frankly, workforce is suffering as a result of this, and we've got to help people out. This project is a block away from the state office buildings, where there's new buildings under construction. It's walkable to downtown. It's bikeable to, all of West Sac and Sacramento, especially downtown and midtown. So we're hopeful this is a good workforce solution. We actually, to give you an example of the brokenness of the system, if I took the square footage of this project and I divided it by single family homes, I could put 25 single family homes on this lot. And if I put 25 single family homes on this lot, my permits and fees would cost me about $1.5 million. Because permits and fees are frequently calculated on a per unit instead of a per square foot basis, the permits and fees for this project are $5.3 million for the same square footage, the same number of people housed. That's a $3.8 million penalty for building density, for building climate responsive workforce housing, where the developer is actively holding the product at 25% below market rates. We can't afford to pay $5.3 million in permits and fees for this product. That is almost the cost to build one of these two buildings. That is almost the cost of the physical construction of delivering 74 units, just in permits and fees. And I want you to just contemplate that for a moment, because that is staggering. So what we've had to do is negotiate a development agreement with the city of West Sacramento, and we're actively working with regional sanitation, and we're actively working with the county of Yolo. We're even reaching out to the school district, and we are really begging for help. And the city and the county of Yolo, regional sanitation, people have been really responsive to this, because as I said, we all live here. We all understand the urgency of the housing crisis. And I think especially in today's world, people are one paycheck away from being unsheltered. And I think that we've got to take this mission seriously. And for me, this is really the direction of all my future work, is to just work on this type of product and to get this type of product on the ground in as many locations as possible. The beauty of this project is I can split a building and I can put it on an urban infill lot like the city of Sacramento 40 by 160. The beauty of the product is on the 3rd floor, I can convert these studio units to 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units without any trouble whatsoever. So this has implication for being a good housing solution for singles, for couples, and for small families. I've thrown a lot of information at you really quickly, and I'd like to just take a breath and give you guys a moment to jump in and ask any questions you may have about the product or what we're trying to accomplish, the hurdles, suggestions, really anything that you'd like to talk about, I'm available to answer.
Great, thank you so much, Jillian. While folks are typing in their questions, maybe just wanted to get us started. Just about how replicable is this product across our region? Obviously, we're a very diverse region, and I think we're all sort of looking to see what it would take to get this type of product to get built outside of our sort of traditional urban core in West Sac and downtown, midtown Sacramento. It's like, again, it seems like what we sort of want on our corridors, our downtowns, our town centers throughout the region. Is this type of product possible in those places? And
absolutely, yeah, Dov, it is. I mean,
this one, or what do you think is holding this type of product back?
I think the biggest thing that holds the product back currently are the fees that I mentioned earlier. You can't have permits and fees be 1/3 of your budget simply because they're counted on a per unit basis. The square footage of these units averages about 340 square feet. So they're small units. And for a small unit to be bearing the cost of $40,000 in fees is astronomical. We're trying to, through the development agreement, get the fees on this product down to about $13,000 per unit, and that does not include regional sand, the county of Yolo, and the school district. We were really trying to get the entire budget of all fees down within the $13,000 per unit range. The killer is absolutely fee. The design works urban core, it works suburban. It actually is a great solution for agencies that are trying to deal with their unsheltered population. It still is a beautiful product. It's not a utilitarian, Quonset hut type of deliverable. It's a beautiful finish. It's tactile. It has, broad amenities and services. I think it's the kind of product that we want to see more of. The other thing I want to mention that's really, really unique about this, in doing this as a market rate build, I'm not building this as an affordable product. If I built this as an affordable housing product, people are telling me the price would be double or triple what it's costing us to build this market rate build. And that still is astounding to me. That's not the area that I'm in. We don't build affordable housing. This is an attainable market rate product. The thing that's unique about it is my development partner and myself have said, let's step away from 25% of the income and hold the rate to 75% of market rate so that we can do something kind. And we need our teachers, and we need our people that work at the city, and we need the people that work at the state. We need people who are workforce to have a place where they can live, that they're proud to live in. But I also need somebody who's putting themselves through school at night with the aspiration of having their next job or their different job that pays a little more. We're not pricing anybody out of their home. So the one thing that has always been kind of my knock, not that I don't agree that it's needed, with the affordable product, is the moment you succeed, you're priced out of your home. And we didn't want people trying to game the system to stay in their home. We want people to be able to live here, whether it's for a year of their life or 10 years of their life. It's a great age in place product, especially on the ground floor. So again, I'm rambling. I get real excited about the product, so I start to talk about it. But if people have questions, I'm more interested to make sure I answer your questions.
Just a quick hitter on stats on the project? So number of units, and what was your unit-based density?
It's 148 units on 57,000 square feet of total land area.
And sorry, units per acre, do you have that offhand?
I don't, but you'll figure this is 40, let's see, hang on while I do quick math here. An acre is 43,560 square feet. So I've got 1.3 acres. So if I take 1.3 acres and divide that by 148 units, it would be 0.008. I don't know what that ends up giving you.
Okay, no worries. But suffice to say, this is probably over 50 units an acre, right? And that's a density that is often not allowed in most of the region. Just a question on parking, or a couple of them actually. So one comment: parking in the suburbs with no on-street parking is a real challenge. If you could comment on that, and then just also just how does the lender feel about the smaller parking ratio that's used here?
Well, let me start with the lender. The lender was not concerned about the parking ratio of 39 spots for the 148 units, primarily because of the proximity to downtown, midtown, the state office buildings. We feel like this is workforce housing that is walkable and bikeable, and we will be charging for parking because, frankly, we want to discourage parking and vehicles. To respond to the suburban comment, absolutely, I agree with that. If this was going to be built out in Roseville, you'd need to dedicate more land area to parking. We see this really, when I say suburban, I see this suburban tied to transit-oriented development where you have proximity to light rail, bus routes, biking, walking. I think we've got to acknowledge that we have a transportation issue to solve as well as a housing crisis, and the two of them have to work hand in hand.
A question back on the fees. So regarding the fees difference that you discussed, were those fees simply the difference between single family residential and higher density, or were they also taking into account larger PFFP obligations?
No, this is purely, well, I want to make sure I understand that acronym. There was nothing about the fees other than the fact that if I compare this to housing, it's just the difference in fee calculation is the per unit cost as opposed to a cost per square foot.
Got it. Hopefully that answered that.
I'm not sure I answered that. I don't know what the acronym was relative to extra fees that was stated.
Yeah, I actually don't know either. So hopefully they can comment. Great. If folks have any other questions for Julie specifically, please feel free to enter them into the chat. I know we got about 20 minutes or so. Oh, and it looks like we did the math. It looks like this project was around 113 dwelling units per acre. So suffice to say, that's a density that's not allowed in most jurisdictions in our region. So maybe that's also a potential barrier. I want to move to just sort of general question and answer. So if folks have questions for anybody on the panel, but maybe I'll start with this one, and this can be for everybody, maybe starting with Susan, then Stephen, and then Julie. If you had to pick one actionable thing for local jurisdictions to pursue related to just advancing ADUs or multifamily housing more generally, what would it be?
I'll give my audacious wish list. I wish that families who are in a low and moderate income situation wanting to add an ADU to their property would be afforded some accommodations for fees and permits to lower the cost of those projects. We've had lots and lots of subsidies that have benefited homeowners who likely don't need those subsidies to make the project work. And I would rather have those subsidies go toward folks who that project is just a step away for them.
All right, Steve.
I think I follow Susan on this. It's my mission of where I'm going with this overall. So this is about, for me, it's about partnering strategies to scale ADUs, and not scale ADUs just so that we continue to reach the low-hanging fruit, which is, you know, the people economically who can afford this with cash on hand, but really go into those areas where it is more challenged, where we're looking at gentrification, where we're looking at communities that that have a minority group that is already the largest group of the displaced people in moving into homelessness. The partnering piece of this is critical, because it means that when cities form relationships with entities to develop solutions, it allows us to open the door towards the financing solutions, to all the other pieces that are necessary to come together to make exactly what Susan asked, a viable thing. And it's not to reach too far too soon. It's about small concepts, proof of model, let momentum carry you, but put something in motion so that momentum is generated.
I would say that from the perspective of the KIND project, which is a larger project, so it differs from the ADU, although it is small space delivered to workforce. I would say the single biggest challenge is changing this concept that fees are calculated per unit. It's an old school way of thinking that's tied to traditional home ownership with traditional square footages. It's not meant for the kind of density that we need to truly solve the housing crisis. As it relates to ADUs and smaller projects, what I can say from experience is that for a homeowner who wants to build an ADU, that is a daunting enough task. When you ask them to then navigate the system of the building department, the planning department, engineering, on-sites, off-sites, the school district, regional sanitation, the county, and any fees that might be associated with that, you're basically setting up a system of just discouraging and wearing out the potential solution. And I have yet to see a cohesive step-by-step helping hand given to the small developer. If you're one of the big guys, you've got it made, you've got the relationships, you know who to call, you know what to do. If you're small and you're trying to get anything done, you will get worn out and get discouraged, and that's a shame.
All right, perfect. And Susan, I know you wanted to quickly comment on the financing implications of stick-built versus modular. Do you want to quickly do that?
Sure. We too recognize the differences in the cost to put those units, again, talking again about the ADU space. By the way, Julie, I love your project. That's gorgeous, and I'd love to hear more about it. It's really inspiring. In the ADU space, financing typically allows for site-built. Most anybody who's doing construction financing, that product is easily financed. When it comes to modular, there are fewer lenders who have an appetite for modular construction, although it, in our view, and realistically, is exactly the same thing as site-built code. It's simply using state code, but built in a factory. So in our space, financing for that is also easily available. The third option is manufactured, which is also built in a factory, but it's built to a federal code called HUD code, as opposed to state code, which is modular construction. That's a little bit less expensive, but financing is not readily available for manufactured ADUs. Right now, that's selective availability, but it will be an area, in my view, that will continue to be more and more accessible. So as we're looking for more and more affordable options, manufactured as opposed to modular will become more popular, I think, in my view.
Great, and I know we're just sort of jumping around topics here, but Julie, I'm curious if you could speak to just some of the other projects that you have in the pipeline, particularly in our region? Would be curious to know that.
Absolutely. We finished a product at 2413 J Street and 2417 J Street. At 2413, it's adaptive reuse. We converted the Chula Brothers Auto Garage into the Ginger Elizabeth Patisserie, and Rochambeau, which is the DeVere family that has the Snug and DeVere's. They have a wine bar there called Rochambeau, and then we've got Wild Heart Beauty in that building. So we're really proud of that, and we hope the community is really enjoying that as much as we are. And next door to that, we have the Didion, which has Babes Vegan Ice Cream and Donuts on the ground floor and 12 residential units above. We've leased up that building. We have, I think, 3 units left available. At 2030 28th Street, we have the Nest project, which is where we put the 8 single-family home sites together on one 6,400 square foot lot. We're hoping to pull the permit for that stick build before the end of the year. We're working just like crazy people trying to get that project done. We have the Sutter Triangle over in East Sacramento, which has 11 housing units and 3 small micro retail units there. So predominantly what we focus on is building micro communities. We built the project at 1813 Capitol that has Pushkin's sibling restaurant in the ground floor and 4 residential units above. So we kind of try to go back in and sprinkle some of these smaller, hopefully beautiful projects in amongst the larger projects that get built, just trying to provide some community benefit.
Steve, one of the things that we saw that was interesting in, I think, San Jose and a few other communities was they had like single points of contact and like ADU days at the counter where folks who were just kind of interested in ADUs could come to the public counter, ask questions. Is that something that you've seen in a few different communities? Do you think that's a helpful idea for folks who are looking to learn more?
The ADU space has a lot of ebb and flow issues that municipalities will face. And I love the idea. I participated in a strategy discussion about all that stuff that San Jose took on. The downside to something like that is it was immediately attacked by the public in a big way, and it overwhelmed the system. So which is an indication that it is a great idea in a lot of jurisdictions are in need of something like that, because of the things that both Julie and Susan expressed. This is an undertaking for the consumer, and it's a scary big undertaking. It's a question of understanding the flow of traffic that comes to an entity like that. Does it outweigh that singular individual and that singular day? In San Jose case, it immediately did. So it's an evolutionary process experiment with cities as they see how that surge of interest ebbs and flows through their system, and whether they make it a one person, one day thing, or is it 2 or 3 people available for that day to feel some of that surge.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all 3 of our panelists for speaking and answering questions today. This has been really great.